and thank everybody for joining us. Thanks especially to our special guest today, Dr. Patrick Fuliang Shan. He is joining us from Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan. One of the great parts about this series is that we're able to welcome people from all around the country on Zoom, which, as Patrick and I were saying, we learned over the last few years and got the hang of. So I'm really excited about this book that we're going to hear about today for a number of reasons. Dazhao, China's First Communist, from State University of New York Press. It came out last year. We're going to hear a little bit more about Professor Shan's research, about the book itself, and about his experience getting to know Dazhao. Dazhao, often considered one of the most formative figures in early Chinese communism, and I think in many ways a figure who perhaps we can still discern in China, his influence today. Professor Shan, as I said, is joining us from Grand Valley State University. Professor Shan received his BA, his bachelor's from Henan University in Kaifeng, his MA from Liaoning University in Shenyang, and then his MA in history from McMaster University, and his PhD from McMaster University. If I listed Professor Shan's publications, we would be here all afternoon, and we wouldn't be able to hear from Professor Shan. It is an extremely impressive list. I will share in the chat Professor Shan's CV, his faculty profile for those who are interested in learning more. And I'll also be sharing a link to the new book from SUNY Press, as well as the Amazon link, so for those who are interested in getting a copy. And we do have one copy for giveaway. So if you're very, very excited to read this book, we'll have one copy for giveaway at the end of our session if you stick with us. Thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming Professor Patrick Shan.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Mori, for your kind introduction. And it is my great honor to talk about my new book through the Zoom. I heard Professor Mori's name a long time ago. He's a great scholar on modern Chinese history. And particularly, he did research on Hainan Island, where a particular local Chinese revolution occurred. And when I was a young boy, I often watched the performance by many different performing teams about the revolution on Hainan Island. He wrote a book on that. Wow, that is a very wonderful achievement. So it is my great honor to be here to talk about my new book. So this is the book just published a few months ago. And the paperback just came out in September, okay, about half a year ago. So first of all, I want to introduce Dazhao as a historical figure by following a chronological order to introduce him as a person, as a historical figure, as an individual, and as an important historical actor, and certainly as a vanguard for Chinese new cultural movement, and then the first communist in 1920s. Dazhao was born in northern China, in a county called Laojing County, in today's Hebei province, not far from modern-day Beijing, okay, and the eastern side of Beijing. And he first attended private schools to learn Confucian classical works. And during that time, elite family would send their children to private schools to learn Confucian classic works in order to prepare for the so-called civil service examinations. If you pass the examination, you will be official in the government. So that's why he was sent to learn Confucian classics. And he was well versed in classics. And for 10 years, he attended 3 private schools. So that means he was very familiar with Chinese ancient classics. And that is important because he would bring some of the ancient culture elements into the Chinese-style communism. because he was heavily influenced by classics, Confucian classics. Okay, in 1905, he started to learn Western civilization at an academy called the Yongping Prefectural Academy. So at that time, there are three major administrations in a province: provincial administration, prefectural administration, and county administration. Certainly below county, you got townships and also villages, but there are three major administrations. So at prefectural level, in early 20th century, the Chinese began to build academies to train the young generation to learn about Western culture, Western science, Western language, and Western learning. Okay, so that is very important because he began to learn about America, about Europe, about Western civilization, even about the whole world. And then he attended a university called Northern China College of Law and Politics. This is a newly established university in the early years of 20th century during the later Qing reform. And Yuan Sikai, who was important political actor during that time, and he built this university. And then he completed his undergraduate study here. And during these 6 years, he even translates many American philosophers, political scientists' works into Chinese, and translated other works from Japanese to Chinese as well. That means during those 6 years, he became very fluent in both languages, English and also Japanese. So in 1913 and 16, through those 3 years, he went to Japan to attend a well-known Japanese university called Waseda Daikaku, Waseda University. And he studied there for a couple of years. And during those 3 years, he lived in an American-run mission dormitory called Young Man CA dormitory. So he befriended a lot of American scholars during those 3 years. And some of his writings were carried from Japan to the US. One of his biographies he wrote for his English teacher, Arthur Robinson, is now a chair at Harvard University Library. If you go online to check Harvard catalog, you can find that piece. So that was to show that he was heavily inspired by American civilization, American culture, and broadly Western civilization. And he studied in Japan for a couple of years. Then he went to China back in 1916, early 1916, to participate in the civil war against Yuan Sikai. So when he returned to Japan, he found that he was kicked out by Waseda University. So he didn't finish his further learning at Waseda, but his experience at Waseda was very important for his future career. Okay, so that's why when he returned to China, he became editor of 3 newspapers and journals in Beijing. During those couple of years, basically 1 year and a half, a little bit over 1 year and a half, he wrote a lot of articles to introduce American civilization, Western civilization, and broadly the whole world. I will not go to details. Let me introduce his life. Then I will highlight some of his importance in the history of modern China. From 1918 to 1927, Li Dazhao was hired by Beijing University or Peking University, and as first as director of the library of the university, then a professor in 1920. So until his death in 1927, he was a professor at Beijing University, which is like a Harvard in the US. So that means he was very influential in the whole China during that time. And during those years, China experienced a new cultural movement. And Li Dazhao was one of the vanguards of this movement. He championed for promoting learning of Western civilization, particularly democracy. He was an admirer of American civilization. He simply promoted to build American-style democracy. But In 1919, he suddenly changed his stance. He changed his stance from pro-American model to Russian model. So this is a dramatic change in 1919. I will talk about that later on. So as he moved closer to Russian model, a communist model, a couple years later, he co-founded the Communist Party, CCP, Chinese Communist Party. And Professor Mori is an expert of history of the CCP. As I just mentioned, from 1927, from 1984 to 1987, Li was a major leader of Communist Party to promote the so-called United Front between the two political parties. One is Nationalist Party, okay? Another one is Communist Party. Indeed, the two political parties forged alliance during those 3 years. They targeted the warlord regime, warlord government in the north, in Beijing. So for that, he was arrested by the warlord, Zhang Zuolin, in 1927. Okay, so he was killed just 22 days later. So I will talk more about that in a few minutes. From this list, you can see that Li Dazhao had a very short life. Chinese in their books say he lived up to 38 years, but from this list you can see in Western calculation he lived 37 years, okay, and 37 and a half years. That's his short life, but he played key role in shaping modern Chinese history. So that is what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so here is some slides about his life. I'm going to let me see. So this is Li Dazhao let me make this shorter. Li Dazhao started to pursue Western learning at Rongpingfu, so academy here, and that is him. Yeah, probably this is the first photo we can find about Li Dazhao. So this is Li Dazhao attending Northern China College of Law and Politics in Tianjin. So this is his class at graduation ceremony. And many of them became very famous scholars in China. So this is Li Dazhao in Japan. Yeah. So you can see Li Dazhao sitting here on the front row. Some of his professors are Americans indeed. Okay. So he also attended many seminars offered by American scholars. And he continued to learn about American model. Okay, indeed. Before 1919, as I said, he tried to persuade the Chinese to pursue American style democracy. He was a Democrat, indeed, not a communist at all. So this is Li Dazhao when he was hired by Peking University or Beijing University as a director of the library. And he dressed like a Westerner, you can see from here. So this is Li Dazhao, and he was a professor at Beijing University. And those are well-known Chinese intellectuals at the time. Lu Xun, a well-known writer, and this is Cai Yuanpei, well-known educator. He was president of Beijing University. So here is Chen Duxiu, and he was a co-founder of Communist Party. And here is Hu Si, who was educated in the U.S. He attended the Cornell University, where he got his master degree, and he attended the Columbia University, where he probably got his PhD. But as for whether he got it or not, that is still to be investigated. So let me see the question. Okay, and okay, thank you. That is introduction. Okay. So why I wrote this book? Because of many reasons, okay? And let me see, next slide is about my reason to write this book. Where is here? Brief introduction. And where's my second part? Oh, okay, here. Oh, important issues concerning that. Okay, so why I wrote this book? Because in the US, even in the whole West, in the whole English-speaking world, in the past 1 century, okay, ever since the death of Li Dazhao in 1927 to today, almost 1 century, only 1 book was published. written by Morris Meisner. He was a great American scholar. He was a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So this book was published in 1967. Think about that, it's a half century ago. And this book basically is about his ideas. And in particular, how Li Dazhao brought his pre-Marxist ideas into Chinese-style communism. So it is about his intellectual growth. So as for his life, you cannot find many facts inside this book. So that is one reason why I wrote this book, my book on Li Dazhao. So other books occasionally mention Li Dazhao, like those two, Eric Delic, Duke University professor. He passed away just recently. And he wrote on the origin of Chinese communism, all Chinese revolution. And he mentioned Li Dazhao in some chapters, but it's not devoted to Li Dazhao's life or his communist theory or anything, just mention Li Dazhao idea. But this is only one book you can find in American libraries, but it's not about the life of Li Dazhao. So that's why I wrote this book. Another factor, another reason why I wrote this book is that many of my students who try to study early Chinese history in the 20th century, they often ask me, can I find some other books on Li Dazhao? I say, this is only one. After I receive those questions, I say, better I wrote a book on Li Dazhao. So that's why I've spent some years, spending years in Chinese library, archives, and some other museums to collect the sources. Eventually, after almost a decade, the book is published. That is the book I just showed you. So this is Morris Meisner's book. Okay, so this is one source I used, Li Dazhao's complete works, 5 volumes. Okay, altogether 2 million Chinese characters. I spent a lot of time on reading this primary source, but at the same time, I read many other sources like Souchang Wenji, that is his collected works published in 1939. So I also use memoirs like his daughter's memoir here, and Li Dazhao's friends and colleagues and co-revolutionaries' memoir here. So particularly they just offer some historical episode in which they worked with Li Dazhao. So very fascinating memoir, a collection of memoirs actually. So as for every stage of his personal life, we can get primary sources. Even he lived in Japan, the Japanese have their own memoir about Li Dazhao's life in Japan. So here is one book, a big fat book, over 600 pages. It is a collection of primary sources. That is particularly on Li Dazhao's time in jail, and also what happened after his death. So this is one book. So that means I read a lot of primary sources to write my book. Besides what I show, I read 100 books, mostly primary sources. So as a historian, certainly as a Professor Mori knows, we need to read the primary sources. At the same time, we need to read many recent publications. I did that as well. I collected probably 100 scholarly articles published in English and also in Chinese and in other languages in order to figure out how scholars interpret Li Dazhao's life. So I use all of those recent publications and also primary sources to write my book. So here is a piece written by Li Dazhao, okay, for his American teacher, Arthur Robinson. Okay, so this piece can be found in Harvard University Library. That is his wrote for his American teacher. From here, you can see that his English is pretty good. So that's why in the future, when he became a communist, he communicated with many Russian agents who came to China, not in Russian, because he know little Russian. And they communicated in English. So you can see that his education in Western learning starting in 1905, and also in 1907, and also in Japan, help him for his revolutionary activity in the future. So this is just one autobiography written by Li Dazhao for his American teacher in Japan. So now allow me to highlight some important issues about Li Dazhao's life. I just introduced his life, but I want to highlight some issues, problems about his life in order to go to detail of some details of his life. First, when was Li Dazhao born? So that is an obvious issue, very easy to solve because in the West, before pre-modern time, or pre-modern time, the family registered the birth of their children with the church, prebendal office. So in a modern time, however, they register with government. This is no problem. But in China, Chinese government didn't do that until the recent decades. So that's why so many different dates were recorded in different sources, such as 1888, 1889, this is a real year, indeed, 1890, 1891. Even here in his own autobiography, he said that he was born in 1890. So that means when we read the primary sources, we must be very careful about the truthfulness of facts. So here is a wrong date. Okay, when he was in Japan, he just tell his American teacher what happened to his family. So this is wrong date. Okay, so that's why we need to be very careful in reading archive sources. So even some American scholar still use a wrong date. For example, this is a recent publication by Professor Dazhao. I don't blame him because he cited from many different sources, which carries the wrong dates. And here you can see the birth year, Li Dazhao, 1888. This is wrong date. In another page, you can see Li Dazhao was born here. And where is Li Dazhao's name? 1888. So that is wrong date. So this is a serious academic issue. And we need to address that problem to correct that. In 1950s, some Chinese organized investigative team with many scholars to visit Li Dazhao's hometown in Laoting County. So through interviewing many local people and by reading local sources, and eventually they determined that Li Dazhao was born October 29, 1889. But in Western publications, this is quite confusing to read this book and other source, which carry different dates. So I need to highlight that because this is indeed something we need to be alerted about. So another issue is his early marriage. So probably that will shock any of the audience in the West. Li Dazhao got married at the age of 10. Wow, at 10. So why he got married so early? So this is the issue to talk about. Li Dazhao got married at a young age because his father was adopted. His father was adopted by Li Dazhao's grand uncle. Basically, they still have a blood relationship, but not a direct descendant of the grandfather. But Li Dazhao's father died half a year before Li Dazhao was born. So his mother died when he was just about 1 year old. So basically, Li Dazhao was an orphan. Okay, he was a posthumous son of his father. So his grandfather was almost 70, around 70 years old. And when he became 10, and his grandfather knew that his number, he would probably die any year. So that's why he arranged a marriage. At that time, certainly Chinese boys and girls would be arranged for their marriage. And they had to obey their parents and their grandparents. Here in this case, his grandfather, okay, arranged his marriage at the age of 10. He was 10 years old, married a lady who was almost 6 years a senior and almost 16, and he was 10. And this marriage was to help him to survive because once the grandfather passed away, who will take care of the child? So only 10 years old. So that's why his grandfather arranged this marriage. This is a strategy for survival, but it have a long-term impact on the mentality of Li Dazhao. According to many psychologists, this marriage urged him to rely on something. In this case, his wife. And in the future, he rely on something, okay, Western model, eventually Russian model. So this is psychological urge to promote him to seek a new model for his country even. So this is long-term psychological impact. So next issue I want to mention is that he accepted 3 different kinds of education. Okay? First of all, Confucian learning, as I just mentioned. He attended 3 primary schools, and he was well nurtured with all Confucian classics. So from his writing, I just show you 5 volumes. He's very familiar with Confucian classics. He often cited those ancient stories to support his argument. So Confucian learning was carried into his Marxist doctrine, his communist model eventually. So second model for him was Western learning. So this education also enabled him to know about American democracy, British parliamentary system, French multi-partisan system, and Russian history, and so forth. And many of those different models would be carried over to his communist doctrine in the future. So that is the content of Meisner's book, okay, published in 1967. Only one book published in the whole West. That is about his pre-Marxist learning would be carried over to his Marxist framework. So the third milestone in his ideological transformation is communism. So this is another issue. Where did he get his communism, right? And what I found in my reading of the primary sources, I found that the current existing model to emphasize the Russian factor is not accurate. So if you read the Chinese documents or books or articles, many Chinese claim that Chinese learn communism from Russia, because in Russia there was a revolution in 1917. Soviet Union would be built soon in a few years. So that's why Russia is origin of Chinese communism. But if you read Li Dazhao's primary writing and some primary sources, you can find that Li Dazhao basically learned about communism from Japanese material and then English material, not from Russian sources. And because a lot of Japanese Marxists published a lot of about Marxism, about communism earlier. Okay, so that's why when he was in Japan and after he returned to China, he continued to purchase a lot of Japanese communist material. So he read a lot. He basically cited Japanese material for his communist learning. So I want to highlight that there are 3 stages of his ideological transformation, but all those would be carried on to his own Chinese-style communism. So I will talk more about that probably in a few minutes, but I need to highlight 3 milestones in his transformation. And by reading all the sources, I found that nationalism was a driving force for Li Dazhao's ideological change. Okay, so when he was young, his country was invaded by powers. For example, in 1900, 8 powers sent troops to China to suppress Boxer uprising. Because his country is not far from Beijing, he heard a lot about how those troops, foreign troops, kill Chinese, and even in a nearby village. So you can imagine that is a strong repercussion in his mind against imperialism and a strong urge of nationalism. And it was this kind of nationalism that urged him to learn to acquire a new model for his country. First, democracy from America. Okay? He admired American democracy. For that, he read a lot about American Constitution, American political life, American democracy. He translated a lot into Chinese and to promote the American model. That is what happened before 1919. Okay, so nationalism was driving force. Even after he accepted communism, okay, nationalism remained to be a driving force because he wanted to save China. He believed that communism was a panacea for the Chinese to accept, to reconstruct their nation, to change their culture. So he even visited the Soviet Union in 1924. He regarded Russian-style society a democracy. So that is what he pursued. So that is ridiculous for us to comment on that, but indeed that's his belief. He believed communism is democracy. And when he was in Russia in 1924, he spoke highly of Russian model. He said, "This is democracy. People are now in power." But anyway, all those shows nationalism was a driving force for his change. Okay, so in a way, you can argue that Chinese communism is intertwined with nationalism. Even today, the Chinese Communist Party still utilizes nationalism. If you study today's Chinese politics, you can see that the government in China simply tried to make a full use of nationalism to win Chinese support. So from very beginning, indeed, nationalism was a driving force for Chinese to accept communism. So this is another important issue I just mentioned. I want to focus on communism. And the place where Chinese received communism is very clear. Okay, Chinese didn't learn communism from Russia, but from Japan. Okay, because Li Dazhao ordered a lot of journals when he was a director of a library, and he read those. He introduced communism basically by using Japanese material. And later on, he purchased a lot of English journals from America, from UK, from other sources as well. He can read English, so that's why he also learned communism from American publications. For example, there is one publisher in New York City called Rand Publications. And from his writing, I can see that he studied a lot from Rand Publications. That is an American left publication, and basically they favor communism. So Li Dazhao learned a lot from those publications as well. So in a way, we can argue that he learned communism mainly through Japanese channel. So this completely revises our traditional existing model that communism was simply imported from Russia. So that is not the case. So anyway, this is a scholarly issue I found, and I need to talk about that. So in Chinese historical writings, Li Dazhao was often regarded as a philosopher or thinker. Indeed, he was. Okay? But they neglected the fact that Li Dazhao was a very famous historian. Ever since 1920s, when he became a professor at Peking University, he basically taught courses on history. For that, he studied Western historiography. He wrote a lot of articles, even one book about interpreted history, okay, which should be emphasized. He said that Chinese history in the past 1,000 years was based on facts. But more importantly, we need to interpret history. So he wrote a book on that. Okay, so Li Dazhao basically was a very famous historian, and that was much neglected in the past even 100 years. And many publications emphasize that he was the fact that his status as a philosopher, as a thinker, or as a professor, as a progressive intellectual. All those titles are right. But if you examine, if you read his complete works, you can find that during his early 1920s years, he basically wrote a lot of articles to introduce Western historians' different perspectives. Okay, he wrote a lot. I will not give you the detail about that, but if you read my book, you can find some. But he was a very famous historian. Okay, so now he co-founded the Communist Party. That is the fact. He was the first communist. So why I say he's the first communist? And he became a communist in 1919 during the May 4th movement. What happened was at the Paris Peace Conference, the powers decided to transfer a German colonial gain in Shandong province to Japan. That enraged Chinese intellectuals, and including Li Dazhao. So that is one factor the Chinese intellectuals began to move on to communism. And he became the first communist. Even Chen Du-xiu, who was a well-known communist leader during the early communist movement, he believed in communism much later, maybe a year, maybe at least a few months after Li Dazhao. So Li Dazhao was the first communist in China. He not only wrote about communism, he showed his face in it, particularly during the May 4th movement, during the so-called protest against the government, against the Paris Peace Conference. So in 1921, he co-founded the Communist Party. So the National Congress, the first National Congress of CCP was held in Shanghai in a French concession area. That is a colony of France. And the Chinese early communists gathered together to proclaim the founding of the Communist Party. Secretly, certainly, they cannot openly to declare the founding of the Communist Party. But Li Dazhao didn't go there. Although he didn't attend this founding meeting, he is regarded as one of the two founders of the Chinese Communist Party. And one is Li Dazhao, another one is Chen Du-xiu. And Chen Du-xiu was not there either. So this is a very strange phenomenon, but still he is regarded as one of the two founders. All other 13 representatives coming from different communist groups gathered together in Shanghai. And indeed, that is the founding movement for the Communist Party. And Li Dazhao was not there, but he still is respected as one of the two founders of the Chinese Communist Party. And certainly Mao Zedong, the future leader of China, he was there to proclaim the founding of the party, okay, in 1921. Okay, so next issue is Li Dazhao's role in building United Front with the Nationalist Party. Nationalist Party was established by Sun Yat-sen and Song Jiaoren and several other important revolutionaries, and who collectively worked together to overthrow the last Chinese empire, Qing Empire or Qing Dynasty. So after that, Nationalist Party became very important. Certainly the name changes several times. Originally it was Tongmenghui. In 1912, the name was changed to Kuomintang or the Nationalist Party. And Li Dazhao played a key role in promoting the United Front between the two parties. Okay, so at first it was very difficult for many Chinese communists to agree to be ally of the Nationalist Party. So Li Dazhao believed that the Communist Party is too young, too small, and have no power to launch nationwide revolution. So he believed that the Communist Party need to find an ally. So the potential ally is the Nationalist Party. So that's why he promoted that. He persuaded many early Chinese communists to support this policy. Eventually, yeah, they forged this United Front. That is a very important page of modern China, which is called Great National Revolution. In Chinese, called 大革命 from 1924 to 1927. And he was a promoter. Without Li Dazhao, I don't think this kind of United Front could be formed. So another issue is last days of Li Dazhao's life. In 1926, he led a demonstration in Beijing, and which was suppressed by the world government. After that, he hid himself in a Russian embassy. how long did he hide there? For over for 1 year, maybe over a year. So from March 1926 through April 1927, for a little over a year, he hid himself in a Russian embassy. So at that time, the leader of China, the warlord regime was Manchurian warlord. His name is Dazhao. And even in the Russian embassy, Li Dazhao continued to lead Chinese Communist Revolution and also national revolution against the warlord regime. So that's why Zhang Zuolin, the warlord, hated him. And when he got the news that he was in a Russian embassy, he sent 300 troops along with the police to arrest Li Dazhao on April the 6th, 1927. 22 days later, Li Dazhao was killed by a warlord, along with other 19 revolutionaries, including nationalists and communists. So that is his life. But the issue is whether he shouted the slogans. And Chinese publications try to highlight Li Dazhao's heroism. Okay, so they say Li Dazhao during his last moment, he shouted "Long live the Chinese Communist Party" or something like that to show that he is loyal to Chinese Communist Party. But historical reality might be different, because during his the time he was during the time he was in jail, he only admitted that he was leader of the Nationalist Party, okay, which is a party nationwide, well-known party. He didn't say he's a communist, although he was well-known as a communist leader. Okay, so another rumor probably highlight that he was tortured in jail. But one Chinese source even said that he was hurt by the bamboo sharp needle to hurt his fingers. But all those are propaganda. And during the time he was in jail, he wrote a long personal statement. He changed, he revised it 3 times. If he was hurt by those needles into his fingers, probably he cannot write that. So all those are political propaganda. It's not a historical facts. So that's why I would say that those are all rumors. But indeed, Zhang Zuolin hated him and very quickly killed him. So now let me just show some of the photos. Then I wrap up and open for questions. This is Li Dazhao's wife, almost 6 years senior. And this is Li Dazhao's home he lived when he was young. So his grandfather, actually, the grandfather was his grand uncle, was a local elite. This is a well-built compound. So this is 1919, the May 4th movement. So there's a turning point of modern Chinese history. And because the Paris Peace Conference made a decision that erased Chinese intellectuals took national affairs in their hand. So Li Dazhao and some other progressive intellectuals quickly move from American model to Russian model. This is the movement. And here is a united front forged between Li Dazhao and Sun Yat-sen. Okay, so here is his American assistant. Very interesting to mention. In 1920s, Li Dazhao hired some Americans to work with him in Beijing to publish some literature and to be circulated in the whole world. And that's why Li Dazhao hired this lady from Chicago. Okay, so her letters in recent years were compiled by Western scholar, okay, reporting the Chinese Revolution. Okay, this is a book recently published. So Li Dazhao continue to build a relationship with many Americans. So this is a last photo, probably in jail. Okay, so when he was killed, second day, New York Times published the execution of Li Dazhao. You can see Li Dazhao, a wide-known communist, was one of those executed. So that means Li Dazhao was an influential figure, not only in China, but also in a global community. Okay. So this is a Russian published, issued stamp to highlight Li Dazhao and his importance. Okay. So this is Li Dazhao's office. I call the Red Mansion in Beijing, which is a museum today. That is his office. And this is the birthplace of Chinese communism, indeed. And he lived not far from the Red Mansion. Okay, this is his house. He lived in 1920s. So this is the bedroom, his study in his old residence. Chinese Communist Party was built here. Okay, and a Dutch guy was one of the founders of Chinese Communist Party. His name in Chinese is Ma Lin. Okay, so those representatives come from afar, gather together to proclaim the establishment of Chinese Communist Party. But Mao Zedong was not here. Okay, no, Mao Zedong, Li Dazhao was not here. Mao Zedong was here, but Li Dazhao was not here. But still, he's regarded as a founder of Chinese Communist Party. So that's it, Professor Mori. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Professor Shan. That was really an exciting introduction to a figure that, if we study Chinese history, we've come across the name. Certainly, also I should mention that my advisor at UCSD was Paul Pickowitz, and his advisor in Wisconsin was Maurice Meisner. So there's a connection there. There's somewhere in there's sort of academic grandfather connection. But this is really exciting, and it got me thinking about a lot of things. I want to welcome our attendees on Zoom to feel free to chat, send any questions in that may have arisen. And if you'd like, Patrick, you can stop the screen share.
Okay, I start with the screen share. Okay.
There we are. Great. And I'm going to change the view here so that everybody can see you. And I'll give a little time for any questions to come in, but I'm really interested in this nexus of China and Russia and the United States, which over the course of the last century certainly has been a really enduring kind of a triangle.
Right.
You mentioned Japan and Great Britain, of course, in that interim were enormously powerful and important. And it seems that the three that are today very, very much in play, among obviously other major players all around the world. But it seems that they must be reckoned with in sort of understanding not only the bilateral relations between Moscow and Washington, or Beijing and Moscow or Washington, but this sort of triangle. And I wonder if Li Dazhao gives us any insights on understanding that triangle that you might want to think about or help us understand.
Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah. So the Chinese scholars in recent years always make a comment on the triangle relationship. They even claim that in the 21st century, the relationship between Beijing, Washington, among Beijing, Washington, and Moscow will be the new romance of three kingdoms. So in ancient China, there are three kingdoms coexisting with each other in the 3rd century AD. Long time ago, their interaction and their conflict, their cooperation shaped that page of Chinese history. So that is the Chinese claim about a triangle relationship. Li Dazhao indeed made comments on the relationship as well. At first, he didn't pay much attention to Russia, indeed. No. So during his early writing, he paid much attention to American-style democracy and a British parliamentarian system and a French cultural revolution, revolution and the aftermath in France in 19th century. He basically centered the American model. And before 1919, the only thing he didn't like American civilization is romantic love. He wrote a novel about General Sherman's relationship with a Latina girl in California, not far from your city. So that is the only thing he didn't endorse, because that Latina girl waited for General Sherman for her life. eventually he didn't return. So he wrote a novel about that. I don't know whether Sherman had a relationship with a Latino girl, but anyway, he wrote a novel about that, very short novel. But that is the only thing he didn't endorse before May 4th movement, before 1919. After 1919, he began to criticize America. He still endorsed American women's liberation, American labor movement. He supported many of those proletarian movement, working class, no problem. But he condemned U.S. government as imperialist government. He began to use a class struggle to condemn America. So that is the change around 1919 demarcation line. So in 1917, after Russian Revolution, he immediately began to pay attention to Russia. He wrote many articles to introduce the Russian Revolution. And gradually, he found that, wow, Russian model is a democracy. That's his belief. So that's why he began to write articles to endorse Russian Revolution. So in the next decade, until his death in 1927, he continued to offer his analysis of American politics, Russian model, and American model. And indeed, he changed from American model to Russian model across 1919 demarcation line. So he just traveled throughout those different models, but basically from Washington to Moscow. And until his death in 1937, he firmly believed that communism is a panacea for China. He criticized the American model, but that is a striking difference from what he had before 1919. So he indeed wrote a lot about those two different models. But big change occurred in 1919. Yeah, that's a very good question, Professor Mori.
It just reminded me
Yeah.
of the scene in Dr. Li Sui's book of Mao saying saying to the Americans, "Hey, I like you Americans," and sort of in the lead up to, but also talking to Dr. Li, who had this Australian background, and saying, "I like this sort of British American model more," and he preferred to have the doctor, so that the ability to have that sort of complex cognitive dissonance maybe of these different worlds seems interesting. I'm interested in a quick question, and that is that for me, coming through learning about Chinese history, my kind of rough and ready version understanding of Li Dazhao was there's a fundamental split in the Chinese Communist Party that takes place between Chen Duxiu and Li Dazhao. And I'm wondering to what extent this is accurate. And that is that Chen Duxiu favors a more orthodox version of Marxist-Leninist communism that says we've got to continue to make revolution in the cities. The proletariat, the urban proletariat will be the foundation of the revolution. And Li Dazhao seems to be a kind of early adapter to a distinctly Chinese communism that builds on maybe his classical Chinese education, but also his understanding of the Chinese countryside, in which he says Chinese subsistence farmers or peasants will be the foundation of the revolution. And he's not really heeded at first. They don't listen to him at first until the devastation of the White Terror and then the attempted extermination campaigns. And then finally, there's this decision after the Long March to sort of say, okay, we have to follow this way. And Mao Zedong carries on Li Dazhao's version of this into all the way in through the 30s and 40s and rural organization. Is that an accurate sort of a hasty characterization of the broad strokes, or am I missing some big points there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Professor Mori. And Li Dazhao probably was the first communist to emphasize the role of peasants in Chinese Revolution. Indeed, at the first stage of Chinese Communist movement, he stuck to orthodox Marxism to launch a revolution in urban area. For that, he organized students to work among the workers, particularly Changxindian. So a railway station where a lot of workers worked nearby, near Beijing. He went there many times to organize strikes, farmers, and the workers' movement. In 1923, he even led the nationwide workers' strike. Eventually, that would be suppressed by Wu Peifu, the warlord, which is called February the 7th strike. He led that. And he was following orthodox Marxism. And certainly, Chen Duxiu, as Professor Mori just mentions, indeed was orthodox Marxist to follow the Western pattern to make a revolution in an urban area by relying on the workers. But the issue is China is an agrarian society. Over 90% of Chinese live in a rural area. So after failure of February the 7th strike, Li Dazhao began to realize that the Chinese Revolution, the Communist Revolution, should rely on the farmers. He wrote articles until his death about the importance of farmers. So in a way, he influenced Mao Zedong. By the way, Mao Zedong was hired by Li Dazhao at Beijing University Library during the New Cultural Movement. Li Dazhao and Mao Zedong often met each other to discuss issues. It was Li Dazhao who led Mao Zedong onto the path of communism. So Mao Zedong simply carried on Li Dazhao's idea on the farmers, on the peasants to make a revolution by relying on the peasants. So basically, Li Dazhao was the first theoretician to propose that kind of idea. So Mao Zedong simply carried that on. Certainly, Mao Zedong have his new ideas by later 1920s on the revolution in the rural area. So Chen Duxiu, however, continued to stick to his idea, indeed. And as you mentioned, White Terror occurred in the middle of 1927. After that, the Communist Party believed that Chen Duxiu made a big mistake. So that's why they expelled Chen Duxiu. Chen Duxiu was no longer a communist anymore, at least from the party's policy. He was expelled, although he continued to claim he's a communist. He died during World War II in 1942 in Sichuan province during the wartime. So Chen Duxiu and Li Dazhao were very good friends. They were co-founders of the Chinese Communist Party, but they gradually they move on to different paths. That is true. And then Li Dazhao was killed in 1927, and Chen Duxiu was expelled from the Communist Party. The new leaders would emerge, and one of them would be Mao Zedong. So it took a long time for Mao Zedong eventually to take the lead, however. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, and I really wanted to know if that's sort of, if after all of your in-depth reading, that fundamental sort of distinction was still intact in place there. And that's really helpful to hear that, because I know when my students learn about this, they learn a little bit about Li Dazhao, and now having this opportunity to read this wonderful book is really a delight. It fills in so many spaces in terms of the important aspects of one of China's most important revolutionary thinkers. I'm looking forward to reading it. I've got my copy, and I'm going to have one copy for giveaway here with my students. So thank you. We're at the top of the hour. I want to let Professor Shan go with our great thanks. I'll send.
Thank you, Professor Mori, for inviting me. Thank you. It's my honor to talk to your students, to our audience in California. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to also the next book. I also wanted to share with the viewers that the previous book from Professor Shan was Yuan Shikai, A Reappraisal. And for those who have taken my class, you've heard me say Yuan Shikai is due for a reappraisal. And this is when I started teaching 10 years ago or more. And so I'm so glad that 6 years ago now, you took this up. And I'm excited to read this book as well. So thank you, Professor Shan, for your scholarship.
Thank you.
And for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hopefully we can meet at some conferences like AHA or AAS
I would
in the
love that.
future.
I would love that. I
Okay.
look forward to
You
it.
have a nice day, Professor Mori.
Thank you very much, Professor
Bye-bye.
Shan. Thanks.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my honor. Yeah.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
leave the meeting.